Hello and welcome to the Over It podcast. I am your co-host, Suzanne Kohlberg, joined as always by the fabulous
Kristan Kershaw,
who, if you're watching this on the video, you'll be able to see the expression. But for those of you listening, Kristan's looking at me like with one eyebrow up and down. Like, you're impressive that you can do that, because before we hit record, we nominally, spend 5 or 10 or 20 or sometimes longer minutes discussing our topic. And today I was like, I've got something burning. Can we just hit record? And you're like, yeah, let's go with it. So what have you got any inkling of what I'm going to talk about today?
I have one possible inkling, but other than that, I'm just going to let you go.
So Kristan and I are both in business, as you know, if you've listened to us before or if you're new. We both have our own businesses. And so even if you're not in business, I think this will be an interesting conversation to listen in on from a consumer point of view, because even if we're not in business, we've all been clients of a business. And if we don't like this, it's our podcast, so we don't have to air it. But what I want to talk about is business focus versus customer focus, because at the end of the day, those of us who are in business, or, you know, in whatever way we work, the bottom line is we need to make money. We have bills, we have rent, we have food, we have children or pets or something relying on us. So there is that aspect of it. But there's also the aspect of being client focused or customer focused, or being of the best interest of the client. And over this past week, I've had so many experiences as a customer that have really opened my eyes to the way that I do business, the way that what I have control about in terms of how people can perceive how I do business, and, you know, what is my intention. And anyway, I could keep blabbering on about this, but what I want to throw out there, or what I want to discuss with you, Kristan, is in your own business, as much as you feel comfortable to share, given this is our podcast and not just me and you, how much does that ever factor into your mind? As in, I want it, and because I know, because I'm also a client of yours in the past, where I've said to you about something and you've like, oh, you could get this. And I've been like, well, like, do you sell that? And you're like, oh yeah, but I didn't want to be salesy. But, you know, when is it like, this is in best interest of the person? Like, what comes up for you around this?
Oh, okay. So I was listening, but taking in a whole lot at once. So
I just dropped a load there, people, but I've got so much in my brain.
So it's interesting. I find each person in business approaches this in a different way. So I've always come with the end goal for me is to get my clients as independently as they can be from as little time with me, and that I love spending time with them, but there's a lot of people to serve out there, and that I would love to get as many people believing in that they know how to help themselves based on information that's around, that they can learn to make informed choices moving forward, and that they're comfortable making that for themselves moving forward. And I think in my early days, I was ready especially to load them up with information and say, right, you're on your own, you'll be right. Trying to give them as much value as I could without them feeling like they needed to come back to me, even though I was a subject matter expert and all that kind of stuff, because I felt like I needed to give them lots of value without the expectation of them coming back to me for repeat business. Some of the models out there that I've seen in some health circles are where you have a commitment that you have to do 10 sessions with me and there is nothing else but that. And they're significant investments for people. Not to say that they don't offer great value. By all means, most of them they wouldn't survive in business if they weren't helping to deliver something. But that's not how I felt. I know that people can get more independent than that sooner. But to the flip side, I also probably overloaded people with a lot of information and ended up giving them too much to do too quickly. And they may have been less independent at the end of that than what ultimately was ideal. So over time, I've evolved my business so that the way I structure things is often I encourage a 3-hour package where we meet generally 4 times so that we can do bite-sized chunks and it's a bit less overwhelming. And then that is in their best interest to bite-sized chunks, go away, think about it, come back, and so on. So I'm trying constantly to balance that I would like them to spend enough time with me that they're confident, but not so much that they feel like it's really onerous and a big package and a big upsell or anything like that. And I think there's part of me that is a very raw part of not feeling like I have to push hard for someone, and people will come if you do a good job and serve them the way needed. If they need more of you, then they'll come back. I met with clients just this week where they came back for their third time outside of their main package because they were ready for a touch base. And so that was not through any pushing on my part. They're just comfortable knowing that if they need just a 45-minute session with me, they can just book in with that as a bit of a top up. So I'm not sure if I fully answered the question, but I hope so. Redirect me if not.
You took me on a great tangent, which I liked, because that's business model, which is a whole other conversation. And I might not have been clear because I was deliberately vague in what I gave you, because that is another thing too for anyone in business to consider. How do you structure your offerings and packages? Because you want them to be in service for the clients. As you said, you're setting them up for the success in the best way that you can, but also in yourself, so that you aren't over giving, over delivering, or inadvertently fire hosing your client with too much too soon. So that is a brilliant answer. What I was more leaning towards, so I'll give you a bit of reference now. So there's been 3 incidents this last week. Incidents, it sounds like a incidents report, not that kind of thing. 3 separate things that have happened. So first off, recently, I don't know if there's a business coach teaching this or whatever, but I had a uptake in the number of people DMing me. I don't really like DMs, people. Email me, always. DMs, I reserve that for memes, but that's just me personally. But anyway, inviting me to join their Facebook group. Join this Facebook group and reach 10K months or whatever. First of all, there's an assumption there that somebody isn't already doing that. There's never any questioning. So I never like the assumption, or I will fix your Instagram. Who says Instagram's even my focus, or I'm unhappy with how it is now? Anyway, that's a whole other topic of conversation. But I get these messages, and I know a lot of you will be like, Suzanne, they're spam, just ignore them. And sometimes I do, but sometimes I feel called to respond. And there was one in this last week, and I was like, thank you so much for, thinking of me. This sounds like a great service that you offer. Personally, I no longer spend time in free Facebook groups. I don't have the capacity for that. I only spend time in the ones that I invest in as a client, but wishing you all the best. Something along the lines of that. 5 minutes later, oh, great, here's the link. And I'm like, did you even read what I just sent? And I'm like, so many of these things are like just a copy paste or whatever. And it makes me think, as the business, if you're client-centered or client-focused or in the needs of the person, actually spending a minute to read their message, the same as the businesses that you see ask questions on their Facebook or Instagram feed because they've been told to, but don't even respond to them or immediately drop sell. I've got a program for that. It's like you asked what I like to do in the morning, and then I say, and they're like, oh, I could fix your mornings with my miracle 6-step formula. And it's like, I think what I'm getting at or raving about is the lack of consent.
Yeah. It's a big thing. Like, and even though I went on a tangent, that's probably part of what I was actually the undertone of it. Maybe that's why I picked up on it, in that, someone comes to work with me, they've given consent that they want to work with me and to build up to a certain point. And my view on that is, okay, this is what I want to deliver. But they didn't consent to coming back endlessly. And I haven't expected that either, right? And that within me, my morals are such that I don't cold call anyone. I find it very hard to, and this probably goes more to where you were headed originally. I constantly see someone say, I'm low iron. I take vitamin D because I'm low vitamin D, or any number of things which are like fingernails down a blackboard for me. It goes against everything that I've learned. I would love to be almost evangelistic?
Evangelical?
And yeah, anyway.
Whatever, that word, I know what you mean. I love you and I, we're on the same wavelength.
Hello, come on, you need to come and preach. I'm preaching to this choir. Are you part of my choir? whatever you want to look at it from. But I see these people that are in a different space to me, that have different life experiences, and the practitioners, whatever the doctor, have said, you need this. And the research that I've done is such that I'm really confident that synthetics for anybody, except under really, for iron, for instance, if someone's had a massive big car accident or an injury where they've bled liters and liters of blood, well, maybe a blood transfusion or something along that line, fine. But generally speaking, my research and the extensive reading I've done for the last 8 years or more, 9 years, counting really, is I would not be doing that. And I would dearly love to invite every single person who feels that they're in that situation or is sharing, saying, I feel horrible, I'm low iron, who should I go and see? I would love to stick my hand up and say, come and see me and my team, and this is why. But I have a moral compass there, and I can't do that. I can't even cold private message the person to say, hey, blah. If I'm tagged, I will absolutely, if it's a general discussion or it's in one of the health groups where I'm actively involved, absolutely. But there's a couple of groups that I admin, which are sort of parallel and quite separate to that part of my life. And again, unless I'm tagged, I just have to save my mental focus and energy there, because the people are in such a different world. It can be too disjointed for them to go, oh, yes, actually, I'm interested in that. And I could put a whole lot of effort into it. And then in the end, they don't want to take action. And again, I don't even care if I share something. If they don't work with me, that's never been of my focus. But I would love for them to be open enough in the first place to go, oh, maybe I will look at that and ask some questions. And if they go and then help themselves, great. That's that kind of inner me wanting to help others coming out. I don't do it with the intent of cold calling, cold canvassing, come and join my amazing program.
Yes. And I love that. Like when you were talking, I had this image of you with like a milk crate soapbox under your arm and carrying it and placing it and standing and tapping the microphone. You'd never do that. But I think the point here is the consent. Like I have been in groups with you, co-members, co-attendees, I'm not sure the term, where people have commented on something where I know that you would have strong opinions, but when they're not invited or asked for, that's one of the many things I value about you. It's like, but if someone said, hey, I'm having this going on, I've tried this thing, does anyone have any suggestions? Or I'm open to natural alternatives. Like there's the thing of invitation. And even then you don't jump in and go, book a discovery call or whatever. You might link to a resource or an article. And I guess this is the thing, in business, in anything, in any way or shape, because so another thing that has brought this conversation to forefront for me is I know that you're on my list. Actually, I think you've taken one up. Zoom cuppers. You've done one, haven't you?
Oh yeah, I love them.
So once a month, if you're on my list, or actually, I should say, when I can be asked. It's usually once a month, but sometimes it's longer in between. Somebody asked me about my strategy this morning for something. I was like, when I feel like it, it's honestly. But I send an email to my list and I invite people to have a Zoom cuppa. And it's literally, we get together over Zoom with a cuppa, tea, coffee, hot chocolate, I don't care, beverage of your choice. And we just like shoot the breeze for 20 minutes. And what's fascinating about it is when I send these messages, I get the biggest unsubscribe of any message I send. I can rant, I can swear, I can whatever, but it's the Zoom cuppas. And out of pure curiosity, when people have responded to them with their reasons or whatever, I've engaged in conversation. Once again, an invite, never a request or whatever. And people are like, oh, I think you're going to try and sell me something. And I find this fascinating because on the Zoom cuppa, it's not even about business, people. We talk about anything. I can't even remember what you and I talked about, but I've talked about fear of driving and someone else shared it. I've talked about somebody launching their art business. I've talked about parenting a high needs child, pole dancing, burlesque, you name it, Harry Potter. It's just literally a chat. There is no interest in selling anything. And a couple of times people have asked about my programs or whatever. I've really brought it back to the purpose of this conversation is a hangout. If you want to book a chat, like I'm open to it, but this has never been an underhanded sales tactic because circling back to my third event for the week, I guest podcast as well as us having our own now. It's a strategy for my business. I can be my introvert self. I don't have to do hair makeup, and you guys don't know if I'm wearing pants or not. Just saying. Anywho, when I reached out for this podcast, the way they had their page, because I don't know, for those of you who are listening, if you've never pitched a podcast before, sometimes you might just know the person and be casual. Like we've had, Kristan and I have chatted to a few people, hey, want to come on our podcast? It's been that easy. And other times they have an official form. I'm sure we'll have one day, but at this stage we don't. Anyway, they had the official form and it's like, we are a top 1% podcast. We take so few of the pictures, and I don't mind that. Like, talk yourself up. There's no problem with that. But I sent it in and I heard back within the hour, and I'm like, if they're really a top 1% podcast and whatever, why did you get straight back to me? So like my spidey senses, my intuition is like, run. And we should do a whole episode on trusting your intuition, because both of you and I are quite intuitive, though with science backgrounds. So anyway, I did it. I followed it through. All along I had that thing. This isn't a real, like it was a real podcast, as in there was a discussion, but really it was just an underhanded sales thing, because we had a little chat beforehand and I got even more of the heebie-jeebies. We hit record, and then as soon as we hit stop, everything that I spoke about in that episode, we could help you with this, we could help you with that, we could do this, we could do that. And I was like, does anyone even listen to this thing? Or is it like how you get the trap? Because like when you're a newbie entrepreneur, everyone has the answer. You just need, and I don't know if you ever did it, or maybe it was just me being completely naive, but I'd go and buy all these things that I didn't need and did nothing. And then I'd be told, oh, you just have blocks. Maybe this is too much confession here. But have you ever had an experience like that where it looked like it was marketed as an opportunity, but it was actually a pitch?
I have. There's been a few online. I'm maybe not a podcast style thing, but definitely even just, freebie things or cheap. For instance, there's a local art lady, and she does online post-COVID. She offers online drawing things. Now, I have to say, for the $7 US or whatever I paid, she runs it on an overseas platform, and it's international, but she happens to be a couple of suburbs over. So for, $10 Australian, say, it was a good little 5-day challenge. And I did it to challenge myself to do something different, whatever. I knew that there would be an upsell, and it was done in a tasteful way. So things like that can be done, as you would expect. You don't go into something like that. If anyone ever signs up for a challenge. If it's a low-cost
thing, you don't expect, and it's actually funny you should say that, because I went to a low-cost thing last week and I was waiting for the pitch, and I was actually fully ready to listen because I had such a great experience, and there was none, and that shocked me.
Interesting. But on the other hand, sometimes there's been like one that came from, I think, a group that you and I have both been in the past, and it was like a freebie checklist or something, pretty straightforward. Again, if you sign up for these things, there's a level of, okay, you're probably going to be added to a mailing list. But all of a sudden I started to get emails about being the best VA and this and that. It was completely, and it was
unrelated to the topic you'd signed up for.
Completely unrelated to what I'd signed up for. And I'm like, what? Huh?
I think I know this person. When we hit stop, I'm going to ask you. I'm not going to ask on air. We don't name and shame people, but I'm curious because I had one too. I signed up for freebie about one thing, and I kept getting all this value or invites to these other things. And I was like, but they were selling this. I was totally confused.
Yeah. So there's been a few like that. Generally speaking, I think the right people have come into my life at the right time. So I've dodged many bullets of getting too caught up in too many things when I was at my most naive point, when I probably would have gotten into more. But even an organization that I was encouraged to sign up for a weekend, like personal development-y type thing, and I knew that they did another course beyond that. They then did another course beyond that.
I think I know that one too. Oh my goodness. I went to the first weekend that was $80, and that sounded great. And their upsell from that was $3,000, which I will full confess here. I was ready to buy. I remember ringing my husband and saying, I want to put this on the credit card. And he's like, no way. And to this day, I'm so thankful because my friend from there, she bought that. So my friend and I went together. We both spent $80. So then she bought the $3,000. Then we went to the 3,000 because she was allowed to bring a friend. They often have this bring a friend thing. And when you sit back and think, if this is worth this much money, why are they just letting you bring people? Anywho, we went to that together. Then they had a $10,000 upsell, which she bought. And I was like, whoa. And then I was at something else the weekend she went to that. So I couldn't be the bring a friend. But I remember her ringing me, or she sent me a text on the lunch break. And there was the next level up, which was either 17 or 20,000. And she was like, well, I need to sell my car. And I was like, I left the course I was in. I was like, sorry, people. Hold up. I rang her and I'm like, hold the phone. What return on investment have you got already? And all this sort of stuff, because they are so good. And it's funny, a lot of these convincy type things, they use NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which is a modality I am trained in. But there's NLP for bad, where you're kind of fishing your credit card out of your pocket and handing it over while the back of your mind screaming, no, and you've got that intuition spidey sense. NLP for bad. And there's NLP for good, which is getting you where you say you actually want to go. But all this back to saying, as you were saying, consent. When you sign up for a freebie, there is some level of expectation that you might get some emails, and often, hopefully, you can simply unsubscribe. Though some of them, I don't know if you've ever had it, but I had a few recently. When I went to unsubscribe, it asked me to log in. And I'm like, hold the phone. I never set a login. So in order to get off the list, I had to create an account. It was messy. And I was like, I might not have bought from you before, but now I never will because of the hassle I've had to go through. And in my own business, it's a personal choice. If you go to my website, it's very clear, newsletter on the header, but there's also my book. The first 2 chapters of my book does not sign you up. Like most people would or could expect it. But there's an invitation. So if you download the first 2 chapters of my book, there's an invitation. So you get it initially and then you get it again. Because how often do we sign up for something and go, I'll get to that, forget about it, and 3 days later, so I send 2 messages inviting, but never assuming and being presumptuous. Presuming. Yeah. We're inventing words here today, people.
Susan's on fire and excited to talk.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'm feeling really passionate about this because there's consent and then there's trust. And when we misplace our trust in people, we can be, once bitten, twice shy. And then when there are people who are really wanting to help or the best interest and they say something that's challenging, or they, it's like, I'm even thinking, I know I've been your client before. You'll know when to come back. Full confession, as I said, after you're like, Suzanne, do not publish that episode, I'm down for it. But when you're like, you'll know, I found that confronting because I was like, does she not want to work with me? So this is all other people's things. And then when we did get on a package, because I've done everything, like Kristan is amazing, I wanted to hold on to that last session. And then part of me is like, Suzanne, you could just buy more. But it's just the dynamic, and we can't be allowing of everybody and where they're at and what's going on. Like there's flexibility. But I think there's also a level of assuming that we all make, and we just ask a question. Like if I just said to you, like, real talk, does this mean? Because sometimes people will backpedal, but I know you're not quite as direct as me, but not far off. You would say, actually, Suze, I trust that you got this. That to me would be like,
Yeah. And that's why I say to people, come back when you're ready. I might give, maybe in this day and age compared to when we had that conversation, it's more, hey, it's probably every 6 to 12 months that you'll want to do a touch base if you're not on a package type thing. Like if we finished our consult 1-to-1 or the package, that it may be, hey, good opportunities once a year. But beyond that, people tend to go, I'm a bit uncertain about this, or I have 3 or 4 questions versus 1 or whatever. And so, but I know that it raises a very good point. It doesn't mean that you trust that that's the threshold for when you should book in, to know that,
Yeah. And also too, that's the thing, the threshold of when to book in, because sometimes I imagine people just email you a quick question. I've done it. I'm like, how do I prepare this again? I forgot. Or when is it time to double the dose? And in that case, I don't mind asking a question like that, like a once off every couple of months thing. But if I had a few, or if your answer then had more questions for me, I'd be like, okay, it's time to book something in. Because sometimes as business owners, we can kind of be like, I don't want to say free secretary. I don't mean it like that, but when does the back and forth become actually this needs to become a paid thing, or this needs to be a session, as opposed to I'll just check in? Because if you think if you get out of the client brain for the moment and think of that on the coach's side or the clinician side or whatever, if they have 50 clients who do that to them a week, that's a lot of person power to respond. I know you, Kristan's giving me the thumbs up and the nodding, because I had a tiny peek in behind the scenes of your business. Nothing personal for your clients, like just the admin side of how you run it. Speaking of systems, because Kristan's a lot more systemized than I am, and I'm just like, I remember like, I don't even know where to start with this, but it's, and also too, the boundary on us as the practitioner to say this is a session. And sometimes people, oh, it's just a quick question. Yeah, it's a quick question we can have a session about. So yeah.
And I guess for anyone listening too, flip that around. If you're the recipient of an email, maybe from me or from Suze, but from anyone, and they say, that is a great question, book in, please don't take it as they're trying to do some slimy sales thing. Like, coming from someone who has an inbox where I now pay people to help me because I can't be in there long enough.
I've got to interrupt there just for people to hear. Notice how she said people, plural. She is not exaggerating. I know.
Yeah. I have a team of people that help me because I can't keep up with the demands of the 2 businesses that I run personally and have not been able to keep up for a while. So it's not that we're trying to say we don't care, that we don't want to answer your question or whatever, but it often isn't just a one line. Like, if it's a link to something or whatever, my team know what to do, how to direct it. But now I'm paying someone to sit and listen, read the email, think about it, formulate a reply, dictate that to me, or get me to proofread it, both of which take some level of time. And then if it needs edits, to go back and forth and to make sure. And some of the questions that we get seem like a really simple question to the person asking it, but they're not always a simple answer. And they really can do, we may do a disservice to you if we just give a one-line response and send you on your merry way. So if someone, it doesn't matter what industry, it may be worth looking at, if they're coming to you saying that's really worth doing in a session rather than in a back and forth by email, consider that your response may be, oh, they're just trying to get money out of me. But it may, in all honesty, be that based on their experience, you can get the most out of it by actually having a back and forth, because they may not have the time, or they may not have a helper like I do to do that back and forth. They don't have the capacity to sit there at that time, but they also may know that them asking a few key questions of you at that moment may give you the best outcome or the best answer or whatever the case may be. So again, mutual consent, just because you feel that someone should give that for free, it's just not always possible.
I love that answer. And I think that's something, very, very valuable, because it does take time to read the messages. And sometimes, like, I don't get nearly as many messages as you do yet, touch wood, and hopefully never. I don't have a team. I manage it myself. But that example I shared earlier about join my Facebook group that I responded to, I would probably get 10 or more of those type things a week. So I have a strategy when responding to email. If it says dear sir or madam, it immediately gets a delete. I don't read past that, because if you haven't gone to the effort to work out either my name, which is splattered everywhere in my branding, or whatever, then it's going to be all the ones that try and go like, we could work well together, and they're talking about, like, I don't know, headphones or sunglasses, like knockoff Ray-Bans or something. So like, sometimes the person doesn't know, is this a legit question or is this going to go? So there's that. But something else that was triggered or activated when you spoke about the responses, and it's just slipped out of my brain. It was to do with consent and care, and it's just, there's so many levels and layers to this. And I think it's, when you see somebody online, listen to their podcast, read their things, you feel kind of like you know them, which is awesome, and you kind of do, but they don't necessarily know you. And you feel like, I've had the experience too where I've met somebody that I followed and felt kind of like weird and fangirlish, and then been like, they don't know you from Adam. So and it's just, like a little, for any other coaches listening or anybody who's in an industry that this might help, this is something for me personally. I'd never say it to anyone direct, but I create for free, as in I write, I do podcasts, I guest, but I don't curate for free. So when someone messages me and goes, oh, you know that episode where you talked about this, like, I've forgotten which one it is. Can you find the link? And yes, it does happen. Now I'm just like, no. The no coach practices what she preaches, because like we can't outsource the work and expect the other person to do it for us. No.
It's a mutual consent, right? The boundaries is something that we've said that we wanted to do in an episode, and maybe this is actually just as much about boundaries as well as consent, in that I desperately, like, the inner me is a pleaser. I love to help other people. Even one of my first parent-teacher interviews that my mum had to attend was when I was 4 and a bit, not quite 5 years old, in my first year of school. I was quite young starting school because of when my birthday is and that. And the teacher was like, Kristan, she always is helping the other students and she just needs to basically worry about herself. And my mum was perplexed by this, and she said, has she done her own work? Yes, but that's not the point. So I'd gotten my own work done, and I was then helping other kids to get things done. And it's so funny because I've seen my own children doing this. I wonder where they learned it from. Shock horror. But I desperately want to help people. But in order to help more people in the long run, I need to put boundaries to make sure that I don't burn out. And some of that is I can't always answer every question personally. So my team do help. And most people have no issue with that. You know, full credit to the people that reach out. They understand that I can't do that. But again, in our own experiences, I'd encourage you, if you get upset by something that someone replies back in that sort of scenario, such and such is not available. And again, it doesn't have to be me by any means. If you're in a situation, look at what it is that's disappointing or upsetting you or feeling impersonal or whatever. It may be that this is a boundary that you've not fully recognized is there, but you're actually starting to press over that without meaning it. And the person's not disliking you or in any way personally doing anything necessarily. Now, they could be, but it may just be that that boundary is something that you haven't had to look at. So when you experience that, and I've experienced it too, when someone says, no, I'm not available to respond in the evenings to your questions when I was in the earlier stage of startup. And that's fine. I know the boundary. I didn't get upset. It was like, oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough. So that person needs their boundary in the evenings, but they will get back to me the next time that they're working, which is generally the next day during decent hours.
I love this. The thing I was thinking about before is still gone, so that I'll leave it to come back. But what else came up from that is too, when a practitioner, coach, whatever, delivers something, like both you and I have done freebie trainings, masterclasses, whatever you want to call it, we do it in the time that is in best service to us, like hence why it's free. And then when some people respond back and go, I want extra access, or that time doesn't work for me, or whatever, it's like, well, if the time doesn't work for you, that's when you pay. Like, I would never say it that directly, but it sounds really harsh, but sometimes we feel personally affronted that they don't have it in a suitable time. And it's like, the person is giving away their time, which is valuable. How about you? Like, I remember my son has lots of appointments, specialist appointments. The number of things I've had to reschedule because I've been waiting 3 months or 6 months, and that's when it is. If you want it enough, you will do that. And if you don't, you'll catch the replay or not listen. But sometimes, I don't know if you ever get it, but I get some emails that people are personally affronted that I do this in the school holidays, or I do this at this time of night or day. And I'm like, yeah, because that's when it suits me.
That's when it works. And this is in the training that I lead. You know what? 14 weeks is the live class duration out of a 16-week course. And I get up at 4:30 or 5:30 in the morning on a Friday, which has its own challenges. I'm not too bad of a morning person, but when you have busy, well, not even busy, long weeks like I do, I put in some significant effort time-wise into my businesses. 4:30 in the morning on a Friday, it's challenging. And I am often working until the evening and the Thursday preparing. And I do often 2.5 to 3 hours on the Friday. I'm sorry, but that's when we meet for, and I know that it's early for Australians, and I know that it's late for
Europeans, but trying to find a time zone that suits Australia, US, Canada, and Europe. It's got to be really early in the morning for Australia. Like, there's just no other way. or late at night. But even late at night for us is still too early for the US. So it was funny. I did an
Exactly.
interview a few weeks back that was 11:30 p.m. for me. Very rare will I stay up that late, but I'll make an exception. And it was 6:30 a.m. for somebody in the US and like 11:30 a.m. for somebody in the UK. But trying to find a time zone that fits a global audience, like you and I are in different time zones now because of the Australian daylight savings. But one of our guests is from the US, and we're trying to make a time and day for the three of us, and that's enough calculations that I feel like that person in the meme with all the triangles, and that's 3. Imagine in your trainings you have hundreds.
Yep. And then just for extra fun, the time zones change. I think we have 4 different points in time within one training group. So last week, part of our headache was trying to sort that out. That was interesting.
Yeah, Australia changes first, and then 2 weeks later the UK, and then 2 weeks again the US. I had that. I was like, people turning up, and I was like, I'm finished now. And they're like, what? Oh, and they're like, why didn't you tell us when the time zone changed? I'm like, well, my time zone changed a month ago.
Yeah.
So all this to say, and I think there's consent in marketing. There's that. There's having the person's best interest in heart, because sometimes the person's best interest who comes to me is not working with me. Like you and I have both cross-pollinated, if you want to use that as a term. But like I've had someone say, oh, I spoke to Kristan and she said I needed to speak to you. And I think vice versa. Sometimes they follow up, sometimes they don't. But I think, when you have the best interest of the client at heart, sometimes they may feel, and I've had one person be honest with me before and say, I felt like you fobbed me off. And I remember having a discussion. I was like, that I apologize. That was not my intention. It's just that what you said you were after I wasn't like, I could. I think early in business, we tend to be a jack of all trades. I could do that. Like, I'm trained in modalities that I could help somebody quit smoking, or I could help, other things, but they're not my zone of genius. So I'd much prefer to send them to a colleague who that's what they do. Like I help people say no without feeling like a bitch, set boundaries, self-care, over consuming. They're my like jam. Other things I could do, but unless I was working with them anyway and we had an established relationship and they wanted to move out, and even then I'd consider, but if someone came to me with something, I'd be like, you'd be best suited over here. And I know that you do very similar in your work.
Absolutely. And something just came to my mind when you were saying that, and now it's gone. So we've mutually both it's working in, so your zone of genius. If you haven't heard that phrase before, there's a brilliant book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. I was just thinking,
I saw it behind you, and that's why I think I said the term. Yes.
I'm like, okay, so for anyone that is watching on the video, you get the bonus of the visual of the book.
It's also on audio. I actually have both. I've got the book and the Audible, and I listen to it or read it every 6 months. I kid you not.
Yep. I first did it as an audio book and only bought this so that I can like make notes,
highlight and draw in the margin
and all the sacrificial things of a book, which I still struggle to. I'm like, don't want it, but I do. Don't want it, but I'm one that I don't like writing in books because I think they should be beautiful and clean and whatever. But at the same time, I'm like, they at least need sticky notes all over.
Oh no, if you come to Sydney next year and we end up with our in-person 2-person retreat, and you come by my house and you have a look at my shelf, you'll be like, oh Suzanne, you're like a book, I don't know what the word is, but no,
graffiti artist.
I'm a book graffiti artist. Yes.
But that book, if anyone is in business, especially, this book is totally what I would encourage everybody to. But to be honest, you don't need to be in business to take that on. But I think that's what the thought was. So in that book, you learn about what things you can be good at versus things you can be excellent at versus things that you are really in your zone of genius, the things that you get lost in. You could spend all day and then look and go, oh, it's the end of the day. Hang on a minute. That kind of concept also applies that if you are doing something that's not congruent, or if something feels really grating on you, there's probably an underlying belief pattern that has you held there, which Gay covers quite well in how he helps you to understand how you get to the belief patterns of what you can do, what you're good at, maybe what you're not good at, all this, that self-perception kind of thing. So flip that around to the discussion we've been having. If you look at, if someone says something to you and you get really taken aback by it, or feel like they're fobbing you off or whatever, maybe there's some work that you can do, not to say that that person has not said something that could have been offensive or whatever, because it's quite possible that that's part of it too, that it's sort of two things rubbing against each other, which are not ideal. But often we can look inwards and go, okay, would there be a different way that I would like to approach that? Or why is it that that's really grabbing at me and feeling uneasy? Is it something that I could, not to say that in a shaming way, again, it's not shaming that you're not good enough, so you're at fault for that. But there can be something in your past, which is a little voice going, Kristan, you're not good enough for that. Why would you ever be successful in business? This person is dismissing you because they're too busy for you or whatever. When in actual fact, it could be that person that said that to you when you were 7 years old, that whole situation does not serve you anymore, and that you may be able to go, hey, look, that person's really busy at the moment, and if I need more one-to-one with them, maybe I am better off in the future setting some time aside and some money to book in. Or maybe I could go and do some searching online and find the answer myself because I need that now, but I can't afford to book in, or whatever the circumstance may be. But often there's another way to frame a situation than just taking it to heart. And I'm not to say this is an easy thing, but it's a point of reflection. If something grates you the wrong way, because from my point of view in the work I do, if you're hitting that and you're feeling stuck and, fingernails down a blackboard or whatever, something's really upsetting you, that's going to be affecting your minerals. That will affect you physically. That will affect your digestion. That will affect your sleep, or some other way. It will have a flow-on impact. So if you notice these littler situations that might be relatively small blips, rather than ignoring them moving forward, it will make a big physical difference to start to acknowledge, even if you just write it down in a journal and say, this really bugged me. I don't really know why, but this just didn't feel right. And at some point I might like to look at it. That can take it off the mental load list for later too.
I think that is gold, taking it off the mental load list, because sometimes too, you do notice something. And I was just coaching someone on this morning, and she was like, I don't know what's triggering this, what's activating this, what's causing this. And my question was, what if you didn't need to know? And the whole way her face changed, because sometimes it can be like, there's something about this that doesn't sit right with me. I could explore, uncover, find, as you said, sometimes there's something in childhood and sometimes it comes to the forefront. But sometimes when we stop chasing it so hard, it's kind of like, I'm thinking of my kids and pets. Like I'm not, I like animals, but I'm not one of these animal lovers who, as soon as I see one, have to run at it. Like, I like the permission and all this sort of stuff. So when I go out with my children who are both animal lovers, sometimes they'll be like, dog, and run at it, like, depending. And then it will come bounding over to me. And they're fascinated by this. And I was like, it's when we take the pressure off, like, I've got to figure out what this is, and just be like noted in the space of whatever, it can come to us. We're not having to chase. And I think noting that something is, or also too, like, what time of the month is it if you still have cycles, or what time, if you follow the moon, where is that? Because there can be other things, because I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll be like, this didn't bother me at all. Like, I'll be like, kid didn't put their plate in the sink. Well, I'll just grab it when I walk past. And other times I'll stand there like, my kids don't respect me. I'll think in my head, how dare they always do, So the circumstance has not changed. There is a plate on the table, but what I make it mean is very much about what I have going on and not what's going on for them.
Yeah. And just noticing, like we said, that can be a great talking point for working with Suzanne, or noticing that a certain food makes you feel kind of rubbish, or after this, and this, you don't feel good. That could be something that we could talk about in a discussion. And again, I'm not saying this to be a dirty upsell in any way, but because that's the whole point of this whole thing. But it's more, if you notice these things, there is someone who can help you. If you can't work it out and you feel like you need the energy to navigate that, even if it's not working out what the thing is, how do I get past this? Because it might feel like it's a really big block. There are ways to guide yourself through it, meditations, or working one-to-one with someone else, or just giving it that, put the light on it and go, is that really serving me to get upset because of 10 people a week PMing me with upsells. You could get really annoyed by that. I've seen people sit in the space of rah, or you can delete them or put the reply
And you know
back
what
like
happens,
you did.
people? The less attention you pay to it, the less you're an energetic match for it, so the less it happens.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny when something bothers you, it's like, you know, Marco Polo with the universe and you get heaps more of it. But when you're like, oh, it's just part of business or, oh, you know, whatever, and you pay it no mind, it tends to happen less. And one last thing is we've been going for a while, so we'll probably wrap up soon, but based on what you just said, like, you know, Kristan, myself, many coaches have many free resources like, you know, this podcast or our newsletters or lists and stuff like that. But if you do want to, you know, book a paid session, and, you know, sometimes both of us have, you know, packages and programs. And once again, not a dirty upsell. I loved how you said that. But if that is not within your budget, and, you know, what is within your budget is to save up and have one session, my recommendation for you, whether it be me or anybody else, is to write all of these things down, like literally come, because sometimes what happens is you get to the person and you just like have this moment of tongue-tiedness freeze. Everything goes out of your head. And then you're just like, I've paid how much for this? And nice to talk to you. Been there. So write them all down, but also don't come to the session expecting all of them to get answered, because depending, like sometimes they might be a really quick one sentence thing and boom, 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 we can move through it. But sometimes one of those, and that's another thing too, we can like, oh, they're just trying to get more sessions out of me or whatever. So if you come, and I'll give you full disclosure now, if you come to a session and you've got a page full, I love it. My first thing I'll ask actually on the booking thing is, what do you want to get out of this? So I encourage you to type it all in. I will look at that ahead of the session. And if it's too much or whatever, I'll message you back. Or if when we get on, I'll go, okay, this is the groups or this is the categories I can see. Like which one is the biggest? Because I want to make best use of your time and your investment. I don't want to fire hose you, because the number of times I've been like, here you go, answered 60 questions in 60 minutes, like auctioneer style. The person's left with their like hair blowing back, so overwhelmed. And it's like, that's not in anybody's pleasure or useful. So sometimes having them is great and knowing where you want to go. But when someone says, how about we do a series, or how about you book, trust your gut and your intuition about whether they have your best interests of heart, or whether, like, I used to be a personal trainer, people, that could be a whole other episode. But my pet peeve in most of the gyms I worked at, not all, but most, was how they sold us as the personal trainer giving you a personalized program, but everybody had the same weight, same machines in same order. Obviously the weights changed because some people couldn't lift as much as others. To me, that's not a personalized program. But, you know, so trust your gut. If you think, yeah, they do this with everybody and they're just trying to sell me something, pass. But if you're like, actually, there might be some merit to this and they do know what they're doing, and answering 60 questions in 60 minutes probably isn't going to get me where I want to go. I know Kristan's laughing, but I'm sure you've experienced it on both ways. Oh, it's a thing.
Absolutely. And laughing because, I recognize that. I totally. Recently, my colleague Morley was invited to a podcast, and the lady who was going to interview him sent through the questions. Oh, well, I know we won't get through all of these, but these are the questions that I've got after reading your book. I was blown away. There were like 40 or 50 questions, no less than that, for a podcast. And I'm like, he might get through 2 of those, because there's a lot behind. They were big questions. They weren't just little things. So
that's when you're like, this is great. You have to have me back for another episode.
50 episodes.
And that encourages binge listening, which is great for podcasts. But I think, and that's the two, being in your power as both the client and the coach, whichever circumstance you're sitting in listening to this or going forward. Because I remember as a client, the very first coach I approached was for emotional eating. I have a history, if you did not know that already, of emotional eating, binge eating, eating disorder. And I'd never worked with a coach before. And she just had this one session. I left with 13 book recommendations. Like, this is the person who's an avid book reader. I bought all 13, plus all the articles she sent me, plus whatever. I never went back to her. You know why? Because I felt bad. I hadn't read all the books. And for anyone who works with me, whether you send in a question to us for free or come to one of my free trainings or whatever, I don't care if you haven't done shit, as long as you take responsibility. You don't come and say, I haven't done shit and it's your fault. Like, that's a whole, and we can coach on that. But like, why didn't you do it? Or why did you feel that these books were going to be and there's so much value in this. And sometimes in the good student, a good student is not made from a good coach. There's a teacher-student relationship, and then there's a client-coach relationship. They are very different things.
Yeah. And, you know, in what you just said, that's so true. Same with my clients. If they come back and we say they've up to the 4th session out of the bigger package, yeah, well,
and they haven't done the things.
So for those not looking along, Susan's got her finger up in the air going, yep, maybe that's me. I actually had someone else in mind, but she had
I feel personally attacked.
No, it was definitely not at you at all. And she recently had one of her sessions and she's like, I'm sorry for the gap, but we hadn't really gotten very far. So I just thought I was wasting both of our time by having it. That was her reasoning. But then when we broke it down, she'd actually done a lot, and they'd had COVID, they'd business circumstance change, school holidays it was the US summer break. There was heaps going on, and they had been doing things towards what we had talked about. But she needed to know that I wasn't going to get angry with her, and it wasn't a waste in any way, because we reaffirmed what they were already doing and then got a few little things that were in bite-sized steps, even more bite-sized than we talked about before, and some of them, just to help it with implementation for their family. And
I think that's the value of a coach beyond anything, perspective. Because when we're in our perfectionist archetype pattern of behavior, or the all or nothing extremist, we can just see, well, I didn't do all the things. And when you go to see Kristan, she's like, well, you might not have done all the things. That's okay. And we can coach on that. But what have you done? And then you kind of pause and stop beating yourself with the stick and go, well, actually, I have implemented the yucky juice. I do take my vitamin C every day, and so on and so forth. And then the eyes are opened. Anyway, I've just realized we've talked for a really long time, but I've been really passionate. Thank you. Anything you wanted to say before we wrap up, Kristan?
No, I think it's been a great discussion, and I really look forward to people's questions and comments and whatever from this. You know, did it make sense to you? If you don't mind sharing, if you're in business, you know, if you could say
your experiences, but please don't name and shame. We don't. Yes, our role here is never to poke fun
pinpoint
or
anyone.
But the pattern of behavior is what we're calling out, not individuals. So what have been your experiences of times where you've had that intuition or gut check that you've ignored? And also, what have you learned from this? Because I remember saying to a friend this morning about my experience, and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry they wasted your time. And I was like, my time is never wasted. Like, I'm either winning or I'm learning. And today I learned a lot.
What can I learn? It's so funny. What can I learn from this? That's what I will take to any situation, whether I'm going, woohoo, we've had a win, or a whatever, or oh, that's suboptimal. What can I learn from this? And that can carry you a long way from sitting in a place of deep despair or, I don't need my time wasted. Well, you learn that next time you just don't engage with that person.
Yeah, next time you follow the gut. And if you don't, that's on you, because your gut was like giving you the red light. So thank you so much for listening in. If you haven't done so already, we would really love a review, or if a review, like writing something is too long, just a rating, give us a 5-star like an Uber. We would really, really love that. If you have any topic suggestions for future episodes, we are always open. And our websites are listed in the show notes. Kristan is the woman for minerals. And when you're feeling that tired, or you've been doing the things that traditionally don't work for you, and you want to be open to something else, have a chat to Kristan. And if you struggle to say no without feeling like a bitch or without feeling mean, Why Wait is the place to be. Come see me. Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you.